Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Grant Taylor. I am the Safety Program Manager here at Eastgate. Um, Today we're doing a continuation from last time, and we started with the proven safety countermeasures for focus on bike and pedestrians. We're going to continue with the other ones that we didn't touch on the first time. So this is a webinar format. It's going to be about a 30-minute presentation as a plan with time for discussion, any questions that come up, anything safety related afterwards. There's a Q&A option over that should be over on the right that allows you to ask questions. You've also put something in the chat or raise your hand. The meeting is being recorded. We're going to post it online once we are complete with it. And if you have any other questions you want to ask that you don't feel comfortable asking in a group setting or you prefer more one-on-one, feel free to reach out to me afterwards. I'd be glad to talk about anything that comes up that you want to talk about. So I want to go over some crash statistics here. So this is looking at 25 and 26 for Mahoning and Trumbull counties. 25, we had 9,854 crashes total for the year. So far in the first 3 months up through the end of March, we're at 2,515 crashes. This year, that was first 3 months of 2025. This year, we are at 2,300 crashes. So we're doing a little bit better so far this year. The fatal or serious injury crashes had 252 total in 25. The first 3 months, there were 55, whereas so far this year in the first 3 months, we're at 49, which is definitely a little bit of improvement. And for fatal crashes in 25, there were 37 total. The first 3 months was 8 fatal crashes, and this year so far we are only at 4 fatal crashes, which is definitely a very, very good improvement. So one of the big things that I keep bringing up each time, so I make sure it's good general information, of course, is the safe system approach, which is the newer way that's being looked at for safety. It's broken up into the 5 approaches here, looking at safer people, safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer roads, and post-crash care. It's looking at a lot of stuff here, such as that, death and serious injury is unacceptable. People make mistakes. People are fragile. They're vulnerable. There's a lot of responsibility for everyone. Safety is proactive. Redundancy is crucial. This is all tying into a lot of where a lot of the goals with the safety stuff comes down to. The redundancy is crucial is one of the really big ones, which there's a lot of efforts in of trying to have it where you're not relying on one thing ever for keeping people safe. You have multiple different ways of keeping people safe. So even when something goes wrong and one of those things fails, it can still have something else behind it to help, where you're looking at making sure that you've got speeds that are appropriate, making sure that you have education about how to drive, making sure that you have roads that have the proper engineering, and then making sure even though there's the post-crash care of where that the ambulances have what they need to be able to help people in situations. So trying to make sure down the line that you're looking at every aspect of what could happen in a crash. So within this web series, this is now the third one. Trying to keep topics short, entertaining. Want to keep it very casual, wanting to make it very personal. Focus on educational topics that are things that are important to people in the communities. The first one was launched. It was just an overview of here's what we're going to be doing in the series. Bike and pedestrian stuff got brought up a lot, so that's what we've been talking about last time and this time. I'm really trying to have a focus on that because that was the things that got brought up the most. As we go forward, got a bunch of different topics lined up that we talked about, but as people say what's important to them, I'll be able to redirect which ones we focus on first, which is why we don't have anything like a worked out schedule ahead of time, because we're trying to keep it on the flow for how people are interacting. I want to make sure this is easy information and having this dialogue alongside of it. I want to be able to make sure that I'm presenting the stuff in a way that's easy to understand and is comfortable enough that people want to ask questions or want to know more about it. And a really important part of this is connecting with people and developing relationships and knowing who Eastgate is, what we do, and being able to reach out and have these connections to find out more about what's important in the communities. What types of locations are people concerned about? What type of issues are coming up that are concerns about them, that beyond just the webinar, that we're hopefully able to work more with the communities and provide this information and help work towards these projects and seeing what can be done. All right, so getting into this month's discussions is once again going about to more of the proven safety countermeasures, which is an amazing resource put out by the Federal Highway Administration. They have a bunch of different solutions for dealing with traffic and crashes that can be sort of applied across a pretty broad spectrum of locations, of things that are generally just are going to help in most situations. They break it down to a couple categories, which were speed management, roadway departure, intersections, cross-cutting, and pedestrians and bicyclists. And then within the pedestrian bicyclists are what we talked about last time of walkways, bicycle lanes, and road diets, which if you weren't able to be in here for that, we do have them up on our YouTube page we have. So we have it up there. You can go back and look at that or reach out to me. But this time what we're going into is a couple different things here of crosswalk visibility enhancements, leading pedestrian intervals, median and pedestrian refuge islands in suburban and urban areas, pedestrian hybrid beacons, and rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which are often referred to as RFBs. Pedestrian hybrid beacons are often PHBs. So those 5 different categories we're going to get into a little bit more here. All right, so the first thing is the crosswalk visibility enhancements. It's one of the things that is very, very useful across the board for putting in locations where you have pedestrians. You're looking at some of the different research that's been done has shown that adding in the high visibility crosswalks can reduce pedestrian injury crashes up to 40%. Improving your lighting at your locations can reduce pedestrian crashes by up to 42%. And having enhanced signing and pavement markings, such as the advanced yield stops, can reduce pedestrian crashes up to 25%. All of these are different elements of this crosswalk visibility enhancements, where you're looking at making it so that, first off, the crosswalk is more visible so that one side pedestrians see it and will use it as opposed to crossing at mid-blocks, but also being able to have drivers being able to see that there is a crosswalk coming up from a distance, and having the pedestrians that may be using this crosswalk much more visible, easier to see. So within this, you got the different categories that usually come up of the high visibility crosswalks, which is your normal crosswalk's going to have your 2 bars going across the transverse ones, but this is getting into more of like in that last picture where it has the ladder, where it's got the lots of different lines that cross it. Helps to make it a lot more visible from looking at it from different angles. The other big thing that gets used at this stuff, if you looked at, is the reflective materials, having something that at night will be able to be easily seen. They do have stuff like the thermoplastic tape that can be gets melted basically onto the pavement, so it has a longer lifespan. Adds that reflectivity, which will make it so that it's a lot easier to see if there is a crosswalk up ahead, so that people know there's a possibility of pedestrians. Improved lighting is a really big one that comes up a lot and gets discussed by a lot of people. It's making sure you've got lighting that will light the intersection where people are crossing, but it's also important when looking at lighting for that. It's not just about having a lot of light necessarily, but you want to make sure you have light in the right places, because if you have a light that is just past the intersection necessarily, it can backlight the people and it makes it so it's not as visible to see there's a person there because they become a silhouette. So A lot of that comes down to also making sure you're getting lights in the right places so that they are lighting up the intersections to the best of the ability to make sure that people can be seen. The enhanced signing and pavement markings is looking at stuff like the warning to stop, yield, pedestrian ahead signs, generally 20 to 50 feet in advance, depending a lot on speed limit and how much traffic is in the area. One of the other things, of course, is for talk about low speed areas having the end street signs. Those would be when you see in some places you might have the little tiny placard basically that stands right in the middle of the road and uh, gives you the warnings about pedestrians or yield for pedestrian type stuff like that. But you only really want to utilize those in a lower speed areas just because of the fact of putting something in the roadway and the possibility of it moving. Each one of these things, though, is different elements that can go into how to make these crosswalks more visible, how to make the people there more visible so that they are easier to see and making that crossing a lot safer in those situations. So the next one in talk about is the leading pedestrian interval. So when having a crosswalk that has a sign for people to cross is usually is they will time them that they should be about 3.5 feet per second of cross time. So if they measure it out for however far it is to cross the street, you should be able to get 3.5 feet of that for every second of the crossing is what they do. And sometimes they can lower it down to like 3 seconds if there's some sort of constraint that can cause some issues, but at least 3.5 seconds is typically what's recommended. That's for the normal pedestrian crossing. So leading pedestrian interval is typically adds 3 to 7 seconds of lead time. It does result in about a 13% reduction in pedestrian vehicle crosses at these intersections. So what these operate as is that when it comes time for the lights turns red and you would get ready for the lights turn green is the pedestrian light will come on several seconds ahead of time. Usually the 3 to 7 seconds because you're wanting the pedestrians to be able to get across one lane of traffic at least. And a lot of the idea there is the idea of they are able to then establish themselves into the crossing. It's when people are sitting at the light waiting to go. Now they'll be able to see before they start going that somebody is in the crosswalk. And whereas if they're sitting there at the light and they may think that it's empty and get ready to go, but somebody's preparing to cross, this gets them out there ahead of time before people are going so that they will start seeing them, recognize that somebody is there, and it also gives the pedestrian extra time to get across the road in these situations, which is really important when you start getting into much wider, more lanes of traffic where it can take time. So having that extra time to allow them to make their way across in a safe way is very, very important. All right, so on the next one here is the medians and pedestrian refuge islands in urban and suburban areas, which is a nice, very long one. So the difference here typically comes up is the median is going to be your area that's in between lanes of traffic. And most people know what a median is. It's where it's something that does provide separation from travel lanes that people could those get onto and stand in and be outside of a travel lane. Pedestrian refuge islands are medians that have a dedicated pedestrian elements. It's ones where you have a crossing, such as in the image here, that goes through the middle of it. You have crosswalks, you have stuff like that that sets it up as a much more defined pedestrian crossing. The good thing about having a pedestrian refuge island or even a median is, first off, it lets people get to the middle of a road and be able to stop if they need to. It can be helpful for if there's a lot more traffic because it allows them to only cross part of the road at a time. It also, though, in the situation where the traffic can change, it gives them a spot to stop if they have to. If somebody turns from a side street, they've got a spot to stop and be safe and out of the travel lanes. Having a median with more crosswalks reduces about 46% reduction in pedestrian crashes, while having pedestrian refuge island results in about a 56% reduction in pedestrian cross and crashes. So one of the important things is when to use these. So not used in all situations. So when you have an ADT, so over 9,000 cars a day going through an area, it is advised in that situation. Usually they're used at a mid block or an intersection where your crossings are where the speed limit's 35 or higher. Any type of mid block crossing it can be very helpful for because of the fact it defines the crossing more than since it's not at an actual intersection. Going up to the approach to a multi-lane intersection can be very good, especially once you add in multiple lanes of allowing people to have the needing more time to cross and being able to stop. Having them in areas near transit stops or pedestrian focused areas are a good thing because of the fact you're going to have a lot more pedestrians in those areas. Having a transit stops where people get off the bus and may need to cross the street and being able to stop partway is an important thing. When looking at these, though, a lot of the important stuff is the median should at least be 4 feet. Optimally, you want to have at least 8 feet. A lot of that comes down to is making sure that people have room to be able to stop and be there safe. But also a lot of that because of the fact of you need to be able to consider some of the stuff like if there's a wheelchair and making sure that they have room to be out there. Once you hit 6 feet in width, though, is you do need to make sure you're adding detectable warnings for the crosswalks. In some situations, one of these a lot of times people do is they will add in these. At the median island will have a angled jog to the middle of it, where that the crossing will come in at one direction and then it turns and then goes across the median and then goes straight again. This is when this does happen. What it's being do is it's pointing the pedestrians towards traffic when they're crossing. That angle helps make it so that they are walking towards the direction the traffic would be crossing from. So they're looking ahead more and making sure that everybody is seeing each other in these crossings. And you saw there was a question came in on the leading pedestrian intervals about does the time take into consideration someone who's in a wheelchair, uses a cane, visually impaired person? The 3.5 seconds, I believe, is considered to be going towards where it's wanted for people that might have more mobility issues. That's why they have for the constrained, it can go up to 3, but it's advised at least that 3.5 is the bare minimum of what they want to look at because of the fact is they are trying to have a slower speed to allow a wider amount of people being able to use them. All right, pedestrian hybrid beacons. So these are haven't seen too many of these around yet. They've been starting to be a lot more of them are starting to show up. These are lights that get put onto a crossbar that goes across the street. They're put up as a grouping of 3 lights, 2 red lights at the top and 1 yellow light at the bottom. They are pedestrian activated lights that are across the street at different locations. They have resulted in a 55% reduction in pedestrian crashes, a 29% reduction in total crashes at these locations, and a 15% reduction in fatal and serious injury crashes. So these lights are up there and they operate with the idea that when they're completely dark, when there's nothing happening, they don't operate on their own. But when they get activated by a pedestrian, the first things that they go to is the flashing yellow, which is designed to then allow people that are driving on the roadways notice it, see that there's a light flashing yellow up ahead, prepare to stop. Then it'll switch to a steady yellow, and then it will go to a steady red during the walk interval, and that's when pedestrians will get the signal that it's okay to walk. The red lights go up there above the street, telling people that they need to stop. And then as the time runs out that's allotted for people to cross, it will switch back to having a alternating flashing red during the pedestrian change, where it's giving you that warning that the time is ending. It's going to be going back to being okay to drive, and then it will go back to being completely dark, at which point cars are able to resume. So here's an image of one near here that shows a lot like what it looks like, where it's got the lights. It's got, typically there's use where you have an ADT of over 9,000. Your mid-block intersection crossings where speed limit's 40 miles or higher or greater, or when crossing 3 or more lanes. The important thing with these, though, is that when you're doing these type of measures is you need marked crosswalks and you need the pedestrian countdown signals, because that's a large part of what you're going for here, is making sure everything is able to be seen, and you need the pedestrian countdown signals so that the people that are crossing while these beacons are going will know how long they've got and have time to cross. So these are really, really good for being able to let people know more about when they can cross, as well as providing that stopping for uncontrolled intersections. They're really, really useful for that. Especially along, like this is an example here of a two-way stop controlled intersection where you've got the north and south traffic is stopping at stop signs where east and west does not. This is a great way of being able to not have a stop sign, but still give pedestrians a bunch of time to cross. Typically, it's used in areas where your peak pedestrian traffic is 20 people an hour. This is located right up at Youngstown State, so it's a perfect example of the type of situation where you do have enough pedestrian traffic to make it a good idea to have something like this. Moving on to the last one that was want to talk about here, which is the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, or RFBs. These are pedestrian actuated sign improvements. They go along the side of the road. They are always set up with the bright yellow warning signs with the pedestrian on it, and 2 yellow flashing lights that go underneath of them to these are used at uncontrolled crossings. They're designed to be places where people are going to be crossing where there is not going to be anything else. It's something to warn that there is the possibility of people crossing. They do have a reduced pedestrian crashes by 47%. The one thing, though, that sort of goes a little bit different type of statistic here that's shown up is that they've noticed that there's a 98% increase in motorist yielding rates. So these do help a lot with making sure that people are noticing and stopping when people are trying to cross the street, or making it does make it a lot safer because people do notice. Of course, speed limit, lanes, time of day, distance do have some impacts upon that, but it's still a much lower cost measure that can help to make sure people are cross. As much as it's lower cost, though, it's also something that shouldn't be used a lot because of the idea of sign blindness, where that if people keep seeing the same signs over and over and over everywhere, they don't necessarily pay attention to them. So you still want to try to focus these at places where there is a lot more crossings might happen, so that they have a stronger impact for when people come to those locations or trying to cross. So that is covering the last 5 of the proven safety countermeasures focused on bike and pedestrians. These are all really, really great ways of promoting bike pedestrian safety, and also even automobile safety for a lot of these are definitely tied into this. Each one of these things can be helpful across a wide variety of locations and are things that some of them, like the leading pedestrian intervals, might be used a lot more. Crosswalk and visibility enhancements are great. They're being put in a lot more places, a lot more improvements going on. And stuff like the pedestrian hybrid beacons and the rectangular rapid flashing beacons aren't being used as much right now, but they're starting to be put in a lot more. And as time goes on, they're doing more. There's more and more showing off of how well these things do work and how much they can help, and that they're going to be hopefully utilized a lot more and help people a lot safer. So at this point, I realized I left Joey's information from last time on the bottom of this one, but um, if anybody has any additional questions, they can use the chat, raise your hand. Go ahead and see at least we got in the questions that were asked beforehand. So we had the MLK at the bottom of Superior Street, crosswalks needed, signage of students cross MLK waiting to ride the 28 Warren Express bus to Federal Station. So I'm not completely sure about the location of Superior Street off the top of my head with what all is there. But especially for crossing, looking at the transit stops, a lot of these are things that could be definitely looked at along with the lines of looking at the pedestrian hybrid beacons, or depending on what the situation is, if there's a light or not, being able to look at pedestrian intervals, the crossings, stuff like this, something I can definitely take a look more at and look more into. Let's see. A question came in of how to navigate ODOT and local engineering concerns regarding unwarranted signals and insurance issues while seeking to incorporate safety improvements. So a lot of it comes down to the issues is that there are warrants that need to be looked at for when doing a lot of this stuff. They're for looking at making sure that there's reason for these things to come in. That said, there's a lot of different things that go into that, such as the traffic and how many people are in the areas. There's also can be stuff though looking at if there's schools in the area can help with affecting how those warrants come up. And a lot of time though, the warrants are still there's still guidelines that are set forth that need to be most likely discussed with the local community whose road it may or may not be, or ODOT about what's going on in that area. So the crash data question in the chat here about crash data from beginning for Mahoning and Trumbull counties. Yes, it is for Mahoning and Trumbull County. Is the data for both of those put together into one number. If people would like to see more breakouts on some of this data, I'd be glad to include more stuff like that. If that's something people are interested in seeing more, let me know. If there's anything else along those lines of stuff you'd be interested in seeing, I'd be glad to also try to bring more of that in. Had another question came in about the operation and placement of the pedestrian hybrid beacons near at two-way stop controlled intersections, which I had talked a little bit about, at least that having having certain amount of the people crossing is an important part of that. It looking at where it's at is the key thing, making sure you have a good reason for people to cross. So that covers the questions at least that were asked in signups ahead of time. Does anybody else have any other questions they'd like to bring up, or locations they want to discuss, or any other safety issues you've got? All right. Well, again, my information's on here. Joey said if you want to reach out to him about stuff too, be glad to hear from you. I appreciate everybody coming on here and joining in and learning more. be glad to talk more about anything else at any point in time. So thank you all for very much for joining in, and I will be seeing you here next month. All right, thank you.